I'm Martin Russ, author of Optimize the Moment, a guide to lead decisively, plan strategically, and communicate effectively. Welcome to my podcast.
Hi, Martin.
Hi, Heather. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. We're going to talk about a theme in your book today, Navigating the Moment with Unbiased Advice, the role of objective counsel.
So important. Probably more important today than ever. We've talked a lot about how we live in turbulent times, and as we watch, even today, more, bombs going off and conflict zones and increased tensions in the Middle East. These things reflect on our lives. These things reflect on our businesses, on our homes, and increase, the feeling of being unsettled. And it's difficult. It's always difficult for decision makers to make decisions. But as times are unsettled, we all feel unsettled. Mm-hmm. It's even more difficult today for leaders, business leaders, leaders of not-for-profit organizations, churches, other types of organizations. It's difficult to make decisions.
So this is change management we're talking about.
So that's where I wanted to go. I've had conversations recently with leaders of churches and not-for-profit organizations as well, where it's difficult to change the direction of an organization today. And getting that unbiased, objective counsel from an outside party really does help. It provides clarity, but it also provides process. And it helps that group of people who are part of that organization to walk through a series of steps and begin to see what the path might look like. So let's back up a little bit and talk about what change management, really is. Change management can be obviously a variety of things, and there's books written about this. There are courses taught at every business school going about what change management is. But really, for a lot of organizations, it's not just about going, we're going to stop selling this and we're going to start selling something else. That's really not what we're talking about. The change is really more fundamental than that, right? We're talking about something that is far more directional. I talk a lot in the book about defining the mission and how important defining the mission is. Mm-hmm. And the reason I talk about it so much is because it's hard. And asking ourselves as an organization or whether it be a board of directors, a leadership team, and the various people who comprise that organization, let's define those missions, those things that are so important to us, that are absolutely critical for us to accomplish in order for us to accomplish our bigger goal, our overarching goal. In order to define those missions, those are hard. Those are hard conversations to have sometimes, but they're really important to have. They're important to have that definition around those missions. And once we have those conversations, and it does require an outside person, that objectivity, sometimes just for language, for definitions, for perspective. And as I do talk about in the book, sometimes it's about getting that intelligence gathering, mm-hmm. bringing in not just information, but going out and asking the right questions. Because a lot of organizations are very caught in the same lane. And once they're in that lane, it's very hard to go outside of that lane and ask the questions they need to ask that bring in those, I call them nuggets, but I don't know what else to call them, those 2 or 3 nuggets that are really integral to looking at things differently. I can give you some examples. So for the government of Canada, for instance, the government of Canada has for a very long time done individual contracts. So if a particular vendor, pick one, IBM, mm-hmm. Hewlett-Packard, doesn't matter, has done individual contracts with each one of the departments. So there's 43 different departments. There's, well, depending on how you count it, 150 different departments and agencies. So today, to manage those is a nightmare. There's 150 different, so for one company has 150 different contracts with all the different government departments and agencies. And there's kind of a group or two at the middle saying they all have different start and end times. They have different maintenance agreements. They have different terms and conditions. They have different pricing arrangements. They're actually for different things. They are a nightmare to manage, let alone actually get kind of fulfillment through on them. In having conversations with the government over the last little while, the nugget has been about getting some agreement around having a single agreement for the enterprise of Canada with those single companies. So you might think that's a simple thing, and it does sound like a simple thing, but it is a fundamentally different way of doing business. And it requires that people change. That's an example of change management. It's a cultural change. It's a different way of thinking. It requires that people kind of go down a path around doing things differently. What does that mean? It means 150 different departments and agencies who've been used to doing something the same way now have to think about doing things differently. So having outside objective counsel can provide that clarity as to how that might work, how it might simplify their lives, pros and cons, because that honesty, that transparency is what will help give people the level of comfort that they need, and do the intelligence gathering. And as we've said many times, the intelligence gathering, the proactive asking of the right questions is what illuminates the path. And when people see the path illuminated before them, typically, it becomes obvious.
So they'll move forward. So we're not talking about change for its own sake. You're talking about progress. Because people tend to embrace progress, but they don't like change.
No.
Typically. They're afraid of it for whatever reason that you just laid out. Could be one of many.
Sure. There's lots of reasons to be risk averse and being afraid of change. But in the example that I just provided, there are benefits to Canada, which, by the way, means benefits to taxpayers, because every time you write an agreement times 150 times, you can imagine the cost, time, cost in terms of people and resources, but also actual expense and having to do these things is just enormous. So having one agreement for the benefit of the enterprise of Canada is a huge, huge money saver and resource saver. And there are, and it's just more modern. It's more modern and efficient in terms of how it's managed over time. But the change piece is what we're talking about.
Yes.
There are built-in fears. So, people are afraid that if, for example, if we go to this type of an agreement, am I going to lose my job? Right? So like all politics is local, all change is local. It all comes back to, how does this impact me? In an organization like the government, like a department, right? Having outside counsel, objective counsel, are the ones who can answer those questions in a way that provide a lot more comfort than just that person's boss saying, oh, no, don't worry about it, which is what happens, right? If an outside person, outside objective counsel can say, actually, no, you don't, here are the reasons why. So we've done the intelligence gathering. No, you're not going to lose your job. Here's how that type of a contract, that change is likely to work. And here are the impacts of that. There's so much more credibility in that outside objective counsel for the decision makers, for the people implementing the decision, and the chances of success of that mission go up, well, I've seen 90, 93, 95%, depending on, what resource you turn to.
So it's planning strategically. Now you have to get buy-in from people. So that's the communication side of this.
They
It's
call it
two-way
receptivity is kind of the term. But receptivity goes up anywhere from 90 to 95%, depending on which, Harvard Review or Wharton School, depending on which, version you read.
And how do you get that receptivity?
Well, by what I've been explaining. So it's having outside counsel do the process, follow that process, is a major contributing factor in change management, because outside counsel has far more credibility, number one. Number two, that outside counsel has to have a robust process. And people see in a process like that it's the decision making isn't arbitrary. So I referred to the intelligence gathering process, right? You can see, okay, somebody's actually done some thought. They've gone out, they've asked some questions. Hopefully they're the right questions. They've got some answers to those questions. And based on those questions, I can take some comfort. I may not agree with them. I may not agree with the change, but at least I can take some comfort that somebody's thought this through.
Does the questions, is that with internal, with your own workforce, with stakeholders? Imagine there's a bit of a combination depending on the situation that you've encountered.
Depending on the situation, it's usually both, right? It's usually internal and external, so that you try and cover all of them. So, stakeholders, shareholders, if there are some, suppliers, customers, the full gamut, right? But and again, a robust process doesn't have to slow you down. If it's done properly and the right people are engaged, it can always be done quickly, especially today.
And so that requires training and other things. So that goes back to when you're talking about the process and the strategic planning. In decisive leadership, someone has to take charge of this. In government, to your point, it's a multi-layered process.
It's one of the challenges of working with government is that there's rarely, if ever, a person who's in charge, and that's a challenge. So we've all seen every joke imaginable about decisions by committee. There's a camel joke in there somewhere, but things do work better when there is a person or a couple of people who are in charge of a project or in charge of change. The more people you get, the harder it tends to lower the common denominator, and that's not generally a great thing.
What are the benefits to this? Because I think when you have complicated mechanisms, my guess is, and experience has been, that people project, to your point, what will that do to my day? Whatever is my self-interest served? And even if you assuage fears that this efficiency is going to create higher productivity, it's going to free up more of your time to think about, to focus on areas that you enjoy. There's probably really a lot of complexity in the simplicity.
So there's a lot of complexity in the simplicity, and change management is change for the sake of change is not always a great idea.
Yeah.
So change management that is based on, as I talk in the book, where you define the missions, and people can see success in missions or failures. So if there are failures of missions and failures of missions early, then the decision makers can see pretty early on that perhaps this isn't a change we should be doing, rather than going whole hog. And we've got lots of examples. We talk about some of the examples again in the book, where companies have really made some tremendous mistakes. But in those cases where those missions are defined and people can see those successes and see things working and see them working early, they're far more likely to buy in early. And it's in those early successes that you begin to see that change in culture. And people want to be part of something that is successful and seeing that change and seeing the growth. So, having outside objective counsel based on a robust process where there are early successes and defined successes that they can believe in, that they can be part of, that is a great recipe for delivering on change and change management.
Terrific. Do you have any private sector examples of this that you could share?
Well, there are a number of great companies, that are getting it right. There are there are some companies that I'd love to name that I can't because they're in the middle of this right now. But the technology companies are both great examples and terrible examples at the same time, because some of them want to go off and chase the new shiny thing. They're always and bless them, they are fantastic at R&D and wanting to push the envelope about the new advances and cutting edge in technology. Sometimes, though, some of the things they perhaps ignore is the legacy technology that's still out there among a vast customer installed base who are changing but learning to use some of the technology that's still out there. So public sector organizations who sit, they may not be quite like a federal government or even a provincial or state government, but they are public sector. So school boards, hospitals, things like that they're not necessarily cutting edge in terms of some of the technology, but they're adopting and adapting to some of the technology that's perhaps been around for a little while. I'm thinking about technology that's been taking paper records,
yes,
and adapting it to digital environments and digital. So secrecy is important, privacy is important, being able to reach into those records and so that your records can follow you and you can access them and say professionals, whether they be legal professionals or medical professionals, be able to access them. So it's a quasi-public sector, but it's also a private sector kind of domain. Those folks are fantastic at being able to adapt to those change today. And some of the things so they're using what is essentially legacy technology. I mean, you think about some of that technology that took paper documents and paper records. It's essentially been around since the fax machine.
Which is what some doctors still use.
Which is what some doctors and hospitals still use. But it's been adapted. And then with some help of some, change management and some great, private sector organizations have helped them to go through a bit of and it is cultural. Man, you think about doctors and nurses in some of those hospital environments who are used to doing things in a very traditional way. It is a cultural change management exercise to get them to adapt to, using this so-called digital environment, and it's fantastic. And the result, for the benefit of the patient, the client, and their ability to track their records, take their records with them, share their records with other, healthcare professionals or legal professionals, really is fantastic.
And that's a great example because it benefits so many people, especially the medical community. A lot of general practitioners, a lot of people don't become a GP because of the paperwork. And that's a front end where we all meet our primary healthcare provider So you've just given us hope, Martin, that,
So it's a change management exercise. The technology is the easy part, right? It's legacy technology. It's been around for probably decades. It is a cultural change among, professionals who are not, let's face it, not great at change or adapting to new ways of doing things. But it also has to be done in a way that is simple enough for patients, and let's be honest about this. A lot of them are elderly, or the families may not be particularly tech savvy. So in order for the patient to be able to access their records, share them with their doctors, share them with different specialists, be able to be comfortable with that environment, that's some would say a big leap of faith. But the benefits are so enormous that, defining those missions and showing people the success and how easy it is has alleviated the fears of even those kind of most skeptical, elderly, constituents who would have been most resistant.
Well, thank you, Martin, for this. This is really insightful. There will be, people can get a more detailed account of this through buying your book. Where can they get it?
It's available through Amazon, and in Canada through Indigo, and in the UK through Waterstones, and in the US through Barnes & Noble.
And is it available in a digital version?
It's through Amazon and a digital version.
Perfect. Okay. Look forward to our next podcast, Martin. Thank you very much for sharing your insights and expertise.
As always, thank you very much.